President Muhammadu Buhari has written to the Senate requesting amendments to the laws and expansion of membership of the Board of Upstream Regulatory Commission (URC) in the Petroleum Industry Act (PIA). In a letter read yesterday on the floor of the Senate, the President also sought an increase in the membership of the board of the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority. His desire to alter the new law is based on the need to ensure national balance in appointments in the board. The President further moved to fast-track the full operation of the newly signed act, sending a list of nominees to the URC. The regulator of the upstream of Nigerian oil and gas industry, as well as the NMDPRA, which will oversee midstream and downstream sectors. So these reforms have pretty much kicked in now. Dr. Abati?
Well, I mean, clearly, you know, there have been concerns about the Petroleum Industry Act 2021 as passed. When the other day we were told that the president, you know, has given more or less the go-ahead for NNPC Limited, the commercial arm that would emerge to be constituted and for efforts to be made in that regard, and that persons have been appointed to oversee that. And then this news, this piece of information, that the president has gone further to write to the Senate to seek amendment of Section 11, subsection 2, Section 11, subsection 3, and Section 34, subsection 2 of the PIA. And now the argument is that under Section 11, subsection 2, and 34, subsection 2, the provision is made for the appointment of two non-executive directors. The president's argument that he has asked the Senate, the National Assembly, to take a look at is to see how that figure can be increased from 2 to 6, or, you know, and then for other directors from 9 to 13. And the whole idea is to ensure representation. The whole idea is to ensure that all the 6 geopolitical zones are represented on the 2 commissions, the Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Commission, and the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Commission. So the argument about inclusion and representation, well, on the surface of it, you cannot fault that. After all, within the purview of the Constitution, we talk about equality or equity in terms of representation, respect for federal character. And then, of course, there's also some point about Section 11, subsection 3, with the appointment of public officers. And, you know, the government wants a proper clarification that those who are appointed, you know, as directors are not public officers, so that they don't have, you know, issues of integrity or clash of conflict of interest, as it is otherwise called. However, my major take, is that all of this is cosmetic. The kind of amendments that, you know, ordinarily we will have expected will be the kind of amendments, perhaps, that will address the major concerns raised by the Petroleum Industry Act. You will recall that when that Petroleum Industry Act was passed, people raised quite a number of questions. Those specific questions have not been addressed in this proposed amendment being sought by the executive arm of government. At the time, the standard excuse that was given is that, well, this is a law that has been in the making for decades. Better late than never. And the point was made that, look, you know, the beauty of a law is that you text it. Once it's on the table, it can evolve. You can continue to amend it. But, you know, these amendments do not go far enough. Some of the issues raised at the time was that, one, there were stakeholders who said, for example, that there's no point having 2 regulatory commissions, that we could have just 1 regulatory agency. And that the functions of these regulatory agencies, you know, there isn't enough clarity as to the details in the law as passed. There was the host communities fund with persons, stakeholders from the Niger Delta, saying that, look, the 5% that has been reserved for host communities is not, good enough in their consideration. There was the argument also about the definition of host communities. Who is a host community? Somebody living in Kaduna who has a pipeline passing through a plot of land belonging to him, or the man in the south, in the Niger Delta, from whose soil, the oil is extracted. There was also argument about the frontier basin, why should frontier business get as much as, is it 30%, right, of profit by the, IOCs? Okay, the question that was put up in that regard is that, look, frontier basins do not only refer to Lake Chad Basin. There's the Gongola Basin, there's the Anambra Basin, there's the Sokoto Basin, running all across the country. So nobody should think that that is an attempt at modernization or whatever. So we thought there would be clarity there. Even more important was the issue raised by the state governors. The Nigeria Governors Forum said very clearly that they made specific inputs into the making of that law, and that their inputs, were simply ignored. But let us say that, well, maybe this is part of the attempt by the administration to continue to fine-tune that law. But I expect that in due course, there will be proposals for further amendments, now that we have a framework that we can work with. But the beauty of that framework, which is a tri-point in law, is in the implementation itself. The 6 months that has been, given for the transition of NNPC into NNPC Limited, the committee that has been set up, what happens thereafter? Will NNPC Limited be a continuation of the present regime, or it will be, a movement to a new order? These are some of those questions that are still up in the air. But as, others have said, a law can evolve, more amendments can be made, now that there is a framework in place. What should be done is something that is acceptable, that covers the interests of stakeholders, so that the reform in the oil and gas sector that the Buhari administration is pushing for can be measured in more concrete terms.
Well, the ink is barely dry on presidential assent, and already we're having amendments. And it just makes me wonder how a law that's 20 years in the making can come across as rushed at this point. Because if it was all properly thought out, we will not be having amendments so soon. Not that I'm against amendments. I'm one of those who expects that 5% amendments to be effected at some point, because I think 3% is quite pitiful, frankly. But it just seems a bit rushed.
All right, thank you so much, both of you, for your great insights as always every morning. That's all on News Headline. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll have Rhodes Sodiri, Michael Wilson, Emmanuel Efeni to give us updates on Africa, global business, and news across the world. Just stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Now for global business update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning, everyone. Basically, it's all about the Fed today, as you probably realise. So although there's a lot of other things going on, but basically the focus of the market is what the Fed is going to say this evening, our time and your time too, and whether we're going to get any clues about tightening the economy and also interest rate rises as well. I suspect not a lot, but it's looked for September. This September meeting is seen as the crucial one. Meanwhile, and it's a big meanwhile, this China comes back from holiday to see how the markets are going to react to Evergrande and all the problems that are there. Both the Shanghai Composite and the Shenzhen Component dropped about 1% in early trade. Then they actually came back. So what is actually going to happen with the ongoing fallout from Evergrande and this is the embattled developer? The first test comes this week. Evergrande's due to pay out interest worth $83 million on a 5-year US dollar denominated bond. Initial issue size of about $2 billion. And another, so it's basically today and next Thursday when we're actually going to see this. The amount due for the domestic bond is estimated to be $35 million. And whether the Thursday, $83 million, it's very complicated, all this, but basically they're having to repay this pretty quickly. If there are initial defaults about this, then there may be some kind of deal done. But if there are, then it's clear that the collateral damage will go all the way around the world. So we have that to see. Now, the Fed, US agenda, will try to soothe the markets actually today. It's been widely anticipated. It will release its usual policy statement. At the end of its 2-day meeting, Jerome Powell is expected to brief the media this evening, our time, and if it's ready to start reducing its purchase of $120 billion each month. Stock futures slightly lower ahead of all that. In regular trading yesterday, the Dow lost a bit. It came back, though. Basically, there's a lot of other things going as well. There's the infrastructure bill, there's the debt ceiling, and so on. And no quick trade deal with the United Kingdom either. It's likely the United Kingdom may join the Canada and Mexico and US trade pact called USMCA. We're getting used to all these acronyms, aren't we? And mark a realignment of trade from Europe across the Atlantic. So anyway, that's trade. That's the UK and that's the EU. EU markets actually now trying to think who's going to replace this person here. And whatever happens, it will actually mould the way that Europe goes forward. Just to give you an idea, 24.7% of the EU's GDP actually is produced in Germany. So how that country is actually going to be governed, difficult to know, but it will certainly have a big effect. The Social Democratic Party remains in the lead with 25%, Christian Democratic Union, Christian Social Union 22%, the Greens have got 15%. So anyway, that's what's driving the markets in Europe at the moment. Who is going to replace Angela Merkel? Right, bailout Britain, carbon dioxide shortage spills over into Europe. Nippon Gases, which sold $1.5 billion worth of industrial gases on the continent last year, estimates that supplies have fallen by 50%. That's echoed by the head of Yara, which is the Norwegian chemicals company. So UK energy crisis continues. The one CO2 producer in this country, the big one, is going to resume production today after some kind of deal was struck with it. It's reckoned to be worth about $20 million. And meanwhile, energy experts are saying that unless some support comes for energy bills, the energy bills could rise by about £500 a year unless support comes. The critics are saying this is the beginning of bailout Britain. We've been through this before when the state's called upon to bail out industries and it never goes well. Politicians who always say yes don't last very long. Commodities, natural gas. Let's do that, shall we, first of all. Gas prices have climbed by over 400%. Gazprom, the Russian one, is being asked by the IEA, is urging Russia to ramp up supplies to Europe. Well, whether it will or not, don't know. I suspect not, but we'll see. So oil rallies on the API inventories. In other words, there's a lack of oil. It's pushing that price slightly up as far as that's concerned, nothing massive. And gold continues to find its safe haven status. In other words, when there's risk, as there is at the moment, but there always is, as intensified by what's going on in China, then people tend to go to gold. That's right. Your global view. Good day.
Right, Michael, real quickly, what is happening in England and in Europe? No gas, no CO2, dinners might be affected, and now there's inflation. I thought last week when the report came out, the ECB said, oh, that's not true. Those reports were very preemptive. We didn't release anything like that. But now the inflation numbers is a big concern now out of the Eurozone. The ECB is beginning to cry out about that. Amidst what is happening in Germany, a lot of people are saying, would Olaf Scholz, that will be prime minister, because obviously the man from the Angela Merkel's party, the Christian Democratic Party, the Union, the CDU, Laschet definitely might not get it. Olaf Scholz is doing well. The finance minister is doing well in the polls. Will it be good for business? Amidst all of those concerns, what is really happening? Because Europe looks jittery to me.
Yeah, Europe is jittery, obviously, for all the reasons I've just been talking about. Who's going to actually replace Angela Merkel and what will it for? What will it for? If there's forced to be a coalition, a Green coalition, and so on, for example, Germany is still the powerhouse of Europe, although France would very much like to overtake it, certainly. So there's a lot going on within that. As far as inflation is concerned, yeah, you're absolutely right. The European Central Bank downplayed it last week. I think it was a mistake to do that, because what they were saying was there was an internal report, wasn't there, that had been published saying that inflation was rising to worrying levels. They poo-pooed that and said that's not for public knowledge. Well, unfortunately, journalists get that kind of thing out. And I think there are worries in this country about inflation too as well. It's again, the continuing question is it a spike or is it actually underlying in inflation? As far as CO2 and energy is concerned, as I said, yes, there's a shortage of that. However, as far as CO2 is concerned, which is a byproduct of fertilizer, one of the two big US suppliers is starting again in this country. Some sort of deal has been done with one of the energy ministers. We think it's in the region of, I think I mentioned £40 million. This is not the way to go, and I don't think it's going to be with the energy companies. What they're worried about is that the fact some of the smaller ones may go bust, and they're forced to take on their customers, which of course they don't want to do. You don't want non-paying customers. You don't want paying customers in difficulty. So the whole thing has been. I mean, the problem is that there are price caps on energy at the moment, and it was said at the time it would be a mistake, and so it's proving to be. Companies should be able to charge what they think they can get away with. If not, then we move to other ones. But that's not how it's going at the moment. So, bottom line about the UK is it's being talked about in the newspapers this morning as bailout Britain. In other words, ministers are being asked to support sectors. Which one is going to be next? I don't know. But it may well be. And as I said, politicians that say yes get into a lot of trouble. You've got to say no sometimes.
Well, clearly, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's hopes of signing a trade pact with the United States is in disarray. What effect would this North American trade pact with Canada and Mexico be in terms of an option for Britain? Beyond Prime Minister Boris Johnson saying, oh, the Americans negotiate very hard, because at some point there was great hopes about U.S. trade pact post-Brexit. What exactly went wrong? And then yesterday I brought up the issue of Evergrande, the property company in China, and I asked whether there would be a Lehman Brothers moment and a contagion effect. But clearly, it looks like there will be a contagion effect, but that would depend, of course, on a number of variables. The extent to which the crisis with Evergrande affects China's financial system, and whether or not China would consider the option of rescuing the company. And if so, what lessons, for now, can we learn from what has happened to Evergrande?
Right, as far as property is concerned, the usual lesson, don't get into debt. That's simple as that. Unfortunately, debt is part and parcel of business, and that's what you need to do. Will China bail it out, or will there be some sort of debt equity swap going on? I suspect it probably will be something like that. Something will be engineered to save it, because China dare not have which it would be if this company were to fail, even though there have been a lot of warnings about it. So I don't think it's a Lehman moment yet. I think what we should look for is to see whether they actually start repaying their debt, whether those bond issuance things. They may be, they may not be. I don't know. I think at that stage, then we could start talking about Lehman's. But it's very different. It's very different. That was a bank. This is actually a property company which reaches out to other banks around the world. And there'll be a lot of investors who are going to be hurt by this. And we will also hear stories of people who've been shorting Evergrande quite severely, I suspect. So there's all that to come. As far as the trade deal is concerned, I don't think anybody held out great hopes for anything immediately on a unilateral deal with the United States, merely because Biden's got his own problems, certainly after Afghanistan, but mainly domestic ones. He's trying to shore up his domestic presence. He's got midterm elections coming up. He's got to think about those as well. I think that, what we're doing is we're looking for dancing partners, basically, and if it's got to be the Canada, Mexico, Australia, UK pact, then fair enough. Maybe there will be opportunities there. It's very difficult to predict, but I don't think the unilateral, or rather the bilateral deal between the UK and the United States was going to happen in a hurry in any case. Biden's got much more on his plate.
I mean, the property crisis pretty much reminds me of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, pretty much. That's what it looks like to me now, what is happening out of China. But thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, for your time. Now, our dependable Rotus Adiri is here to give us an African business update. Over to you, Rotus. Good morning.
Good morning, Tundu. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, all our viewers. We kick off with the outcome of the Eurobond excursion by Nigeria, which was pretty successful. we pulled in, you should see the details on your screen right now. So 3 tranches of the bond. The bond, of course, financial instrument. It's essentially an IOU, promise to pay investors over a period of time. So you're looking at 3 tranches on your screen there. 7-year tranche, $1.25 billion at 6.1%, well, 6.125%. 12-year tranche at $1.5 billion at 7.35%, and then a 30-year tranche at 1.25 at 8.25%. Nigeria actually intended to pull in $3 billion, but it was 3 times oversubscribed, meaning that the demand exceeded what was offered. So we initially went for $3 billion, but we said, okay, let's take an extra $1 billion. So what that means is a 3x oversubscription means it was the books closed at 12 billion is what investors were ready to give. But we took 4 billion. This is, of course, after 2 days of virtual meetings with investors, Nigeria's economic team meeting with investors. Local investors were also involved as well. Investors came from Europe, the United States, and Asia. This is part of course, the new External Borrowing 2021 Appropriation Act. Projects are going to be financed from this debt that's been raised. Also, the federal government doesn't end up crowding out the private sector. If they had come to look for this money in the domestic market, they would essentially crowd out the private sector. So it's a good thing that they went international. However, there is, of course, the matter of debt. We talked about debt all through last week. The Center for Social Justice doing salami, debt last week. So as at March of this year, according to the Debt Management Office, external borrowing is at $32 billion. So obviously we need to be updated on the DMO's, the Debt Management Office website to know exactly where we are with external debt at this point. Adding this, that also piles onto it. But before I get to the risks, there's debt. But let me come back to the fact that, projects are going to be financed. Also, we've talked about exchange rates a lot over the last this past week. This now, of course, is going to prop up the reserves and bringing some much-needed liquidity into the foreign exchange market, and hopefully, that should give the Godwin Emefiele and the central bank some firepower with respect to the reserves. So now back to the reserves. Of course, there's debt. We're at 32 billion external borrowing. There's also foreign exchange risk. Right, you're borrowing in foreign currency. There isn't much of interest rate risk. Michael Wilson, of course, was talking about the Fed. Their monetary policy meeting ends today. We're not expecting interest rates in the United States to rise anytime soon. So those, again, if you look at the initial numbers on your screen, those are single-digit rates: 6.12 for the first tranche, 7.3, 8.2. So there isn't much of interest rate risk, at least in the near term, until you see what the Fed does over the next few months and whether or not that, of course, affects borrowing rates. But right now, the interest rate environment for Euro bonds is relatively low. So a good outing. And look, overall, it's a good picture for Nigeria's debt profile, that investors would oversubscribe 3 times what was requested. So that means investors believe that Nigeria is able to pay her bills when borrowing. So it's a good thing for us. So again, $4 billion raised for the Euro bond for Nigeria. Borrowing doesn't end, though. There's still more borrowing down the line. We move to oil and gas. You heard Michael Wilson talking about oil and gas a moment ago. There's oil and gas headlines across the world. The federal government of Nigeria has written to OPEC to allow Nigeria's OPEC quota increase. Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Timi Presilva, he's in Dubai for a gas tech conference. And on the sidelines of that conference, he was talking to the media saying that, look, there were issues in the Niger Delta, technical issues with the, to comply with OPEC's stringent cuts, which of course precipitated by how the coronavirus affected oil prices. Nigeria essentially had to comply and reduce outputs, which, when you shut down these reservoirs, having to start them up again takes some time. There's issue of, vandalism and a number of other issues. So what Timi Presilva is saying is that we can reach 1.7 million barrels per day by November, hopefully 2.2 million, which is our full capacity by the end of the year. Case in point, Nigeria's self-reported quota production, oil production, 1.2 million barrels per day in August, down from 1.4 million in July. So that's pretty low. It's one of the lowest levels, production levels we've seen in a while. And look, oil prices are what, $74, $75 a barrel. We should be reaping the rewards from higher oil prices, but we can't because we have to comply. OPEC Plus, again, will be meeting October 4th. Remember, in their July meeting, they agreed for a collective 400,000 barrel per day increase for the entire group over the next few months, just to slowly ease those production cuts. So again, Nigeria has written to OPEC Plus, and they want to see if output can be increased. We'll see whether OPEC will agree to that. More on gas. The NLNG, Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas, is saying that this is, of course, the joint venture between the Nigerian government, Shell, Total, and ENI. Which is exports liquefied natural gas overseas. They're saying they will look at the domestic market in Nigeria in July of 2022, which is, they're essentially saying that as far as the quota they've applied to the domestic market, it was about 450,000 metric tons, but the domestic market was only to take up about 375,000 metric tons. Why? Their vessel at the Apapa ports has been delayed. There are storage issues at the terminals there. There's a bunch of technical issues with respect to our local gas being able to accommodate the amount of demand, meet up with demand. I think local gas demand is about 1.2 million metric tons, but we're only able to take up about 375 domestically, which means the remaining balance has to be imported from elsewhere. And NLNG is saying they could meet that, but they have to take care of those issues. So, and look, think about this. Cooking gas the prices of cooking gas have gone up recently. Nigeria could have keyed itself into, on the export side. Look at what's happening in the UK with the gas shortages, where Michael Wilson was just talking about Russia having to ramp up. So it's a shame that we're not quite there and able to plug into these gaps. But on the domestic side, there are technical issues that need to be faced before we can take up what LNG wants to be able to provide. But by and large, July is what they're aiming for. And then finally, in Kenya, Netflix is offering a free service to Kenyans in order to try to get itself into that market. It's giving them a free mobile service, and then hopefully people start paying up later on.
Okay, Rotus, I mean, that's always the challenge with Nigeria. A lot of opportunities, a lot of potential, but we're not harnessing it properly. You talked about gas. It's something we can use big time. The UK has a big energy crisis. This is something we have in abundance here. This is something we even flare. And it shocks me when I see that we flare so much gas and other people need it around the world. And really, I always argue to the high heavens that Nigeria is not an oil-producing economy or a hydrocarbon economy. It's a gas economy. Gas has untapped potential, for power and the likes, even for industry. But we've not been able to harness gas properly. And I think the furtherance of this conversation should be about gas. You talked about debt. Yeah, we'll take more debt. Why we'll take more debt is the question always remains, what have we done with the debt we have taken on ground before? And how can we show up revenue? And there are some bottlenecks around. There is no how. We need to have strong conversations about subsidy removal. Because you see, when these bottlenecks are on ground, we can't free enough capital to be able to deploy to other areas necessary. I mean, social areas, education, health, and the likes. We need to free that capital base. So we keep taking debt if we've not freed this capital base. I mean, a great example is check all over Africa. Côte d'Ivoire, price of petrol here, low. We're subsidizing for who? The rich. So this is a conversation we need to ask ourselves. Yep. And we need to get the political will to answer. Because if we don't block these leakages, we can't free enough capital to be able to do some other things and block other leakages. And government too should tell people the truth and be transparent with them. Nigerians are willing to listen and understand. If the truth is being told, and we see that level of transparency. I'm waiting for the DMO to come out with the debt numbers. It would definitely increase. It is staggering. It is painful for us at this time. But we too need to look inwards and do what is right.
Well, quickly, with regard to the exceptional performance and the exceptional outcome of the Eurobond that was raised by Nigeria. Yes, congratulations. You're right, it shows investor confidence in the economy, particularly as foreign investors from Asia and Europe showed interest, expressed confidence in our economy. Even local investors, were part of it, and it was oversubscribed. And And then, of course, it will help with external reserves. It will help with the supply of forex. But we must all know that, yes, when you raise a Eurobond or you borrow more money, it's money that you will still have to pay back, particularly with bonds. When the bonds mature, you have to pay back. And that is why it is important what you do, the quality of use. We've been told that what has been borrowed will be used to fund projects in the 2021 budget, and that this will address the deficit of about 5 billion naira that is in that particular budget. So the quality of use is important. If this money is used, these resources are deployed to build infrastructure, then of course there is no problem in education, in health, in different aspects of our lives, and to improve the quality of life in the country. That will be fine indeed. But if part of that money is going to go to the funding of consumption, particularly conspicuous consumption by the elite, then of course that will be a problem. So we need to have the right framework in place to make sure that the money, the quality of use is something that can inspire confidence, because that's more important. As for Nigerian LNG, yes, Nigerian LNG, I'm sure, has enough capacity to produce more, in terms of gas. What we use, cooking gas, I think that's the one that is called LPG, right? Okay, between 350,000, 450,000 metric tons. We're unable to take all of that. Now they're looking at about 1 million metric tons. Now that should draw attention to something. The capacity to produce is not a problem. It's about the framework for ensuring distribution, the infrastructure. You made a point that cooking gas is so expensive in Nigeria. That shouldn't be the case. It's because there is a missing link somewhere. And that missing link is in terms of the distribution, the framework that is in place to make sure that this gas, gets out there. As for the OPEC quota, well, at a point Nigeria was one of those countries breaching the OPEC quota regulations. Nigeria, Angola, and some other countries. Even if the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources always assured us that Nigeria was within the framework. But there are other persons who raise the question about what Nigeria is still doing in OPEC, or OPEC Plus, if you like. Saudi Arabia.
I'm one of those.
Saudi Arabia, yes, okay, Tunde is just saying she's one of those persons. Saudi Arabia, with a population of maybe about 30 million, can produce up to, is it about 50 million barrels per day and sell whatever it wants if it so chooses. China is producing shale oil. The United States has shale oil. Yeah, OPEC Plus has been trying to balance demand and supply. Okay, at what point are we going to reach when Nigeria will begin to say, well, do we have to be part of a price cartel, that limits our capacity, and considering the fact that we need more revenue, even if the future of oil itself is uncertain, although the counter-argument is that in 50 years, we'll still be depending on hydrocarbons. These are some of the issues. Although I know that when we discussed OPEC the last time, you were very optimistic about, the importance of OPEC.
Well, I was about to raise that question. I think we've been in OPEC, 50 years? That marriage has lasted 50 years. I think it's time for a divorce. I don't know why we're still there writing letters and requesting this quota, but what do you think? What's your thoughts on this?
Nigeria can't just, it's Saudi Arabia. We're not producing enough to break away from the cartel. The cartel controls oil prices. So you have to be, if you can't beat them, join them. You have to be part of the group. Unless you've got dissent from the likes of other nations that can be enough to influence prices if they were to break away from the cartel, Nigeria can't go it alone. So that's a long way off for now.
How unfortunate.
All right, thank you so much, Tunde and Dr. Bati, for your insights. And Rotus, thank you so much for your insights.